We've always been told that the US has the most powerful military on Earth, but what if that's not true anymore? In late 2023, its most heavily protected airspace was breached, not once, not twice, but at least 17 separate times. And the response from the military? They watched it happen. The Pentagon is sitting on a number of highly classified videos supposedly linked to unidentified objects. But what if this has nothing to do with aliens at all? Maybe the reason Congress can't get a straight answer is simpler and more unsettling. The military already knows what's flying over U.S. airspace. They just don't know how to stop it. In December 2023, for 17 consecutive nights, between 1 and 2 dozen unidentified drones appeared over Joint Base Langley Eustis in Virginia. The base is home to the F-22 Raptor, arguably the most sophisticated air superiority fighter ever built. The drones arrived just after dusk. Some had lights that were caught by cameras, some didn't. They flew in loose formations, split apart, and then regrouped. The largest, by official Air Force estimates, reached up to 20 feet in length, flying over 100 miles per hour at altitudes between 3,000 and 4,000 feet. Senior military commanders reportedly climbed onto rooftops with night vision goggles to get a better look. But more importantly, nobody could identify or intercept the drones. The F-22 squadron stationed at Langley had to be grounded, and their nighttime operations were canceled. The Air Force confirmed the incident in a statement, suggesting the installation first observed UAS activities the evening of December 6th and experienced multiple incursions throughout December. None of the incursions appeared to exhibit hostile intent, but anything flying in our restricted airspace can pose a threat to flight safety. Even now, the Pentagon still has no explanation for where they came from. The military's official position was that an unknown fleet operated over one of America's most advanced fighter bases for 17 straight nights. It managed to ground aircraft, slip past every detection system, and avoid every attempt to intercept it. And it didn't behave like anything they'd seen before. Official reports didn't even call them drones or UAS. They were labeled as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. Now consider what Congress was told around that same period. Whistleblower David Grusch is a 14-year Air Force intelligence officer. He also served as co-lead on unidentified anomalous phenomena analysis. In July 2023, he testified under oath that the government has run a decades-long crash retrieval and reverse engineering program involving objects of non-human origin. He also said that he was denied access to the very programs he was assigned to investigate, and claimed the military misappropriated funds to shield these operations from congressional oversight. Echoing Grusch's words was a former Navy Lieutenant Ryan Graves. He pointed out that under official policy, most UAP sensor data collected by military systems since 2021 has been classified at secret level or higher by the Pentagon. Most of it. Finally, 95% of UAP sightings by military and commercial pilots are never formally reported. In fact, there are reportedly 46 specific videos the Pentagon is currently withholding from the House Oversight Committee. They're captured by military sensors, and then they're classified at levels that block congressional access. Some analysts believe the public has been told that these tapes are classified to prevent mass panic about the existence of non-human intelligence, that the footage is so extraordinary that releasing it would destabilize civilization. But if these craft were truly otherworldly, then the most famous UAP clips we already have should stand up when you really look at them. And they don't. The Gimbal video is the most famous piece of UAP evidence in the public record. Released officially by the Pentagon in 2020, it was captured in January 2015 by the infrared sensor of an FA-18F Super Hornet off the East Coast. What viewers saw, or rather what they were told they were seeing, was a dark elliptical object rotating steadily against the wind direction. There were no visible means of propulsion, no wings, no exhaust plume. The clip went viral. In the video, the pilots in the cockpit audio can be heard to say, "Look at that thing, and it's rotating." Millions of people watched those clips and they came to the same conclusion. What they were seeing wasn't from this Earth, and it wasn't built by human hands. What the audience wasn't told is the technical context of how the image was produced. The sensor capturing the footage is the Raytheon AN/ASQ-228 Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, better known as the ATFlyer system. It's a sensor mounted on the outside of the aircraft, and when the target moves toward the edge of its range, the camera inside of the pod physically turns within its housing to keep it in view. In infrared at that distance and through the atmosphere, a far-off aircraft shows up as a blurry heat spot that the sensor tries to lock onto. When the tracking pod rotates to stay locked, that motion gets carried into the image, and what you see looks like the object itself is spinning. Mick West, a science writer known for analyzing UAP footage, has spent years breaking down military videos frame by frame. He walked through the gimbal footage using the pod's specs, cockpit data, and the geometry of how the sensor moves. His conclusion was that the rotation everyone saw wasn't the object rotating at all. It was a camera effect inside of the AtFlyer system. In other words, the video that convinced millions they were seeing alien technology may have just been the camera itself. Our own equipment was lying to us. And if the most famous, most extensively distributed piece of UAP evidence in the public record is an optical illusion, then we're no longer asking whether aliens are real. What we should be asking is, what was actually over Langley? Or better yet, what does that say about the state of America's defenses that no one could stop it? Joint Base Langley Eustis is home to 2 F-22 Raptor fighter squadrons, and it sits inside NORAD's air defense network for the U.S. Capitol Corridor. Air Combat Command is based there, and nearby are major Navy installations along Virginia's coast. In the architecture of American air defense, it's about as important as it gets inside the continental U.S. Beginning on the evening of December 6, 2023, and continuing for 17 nights through December 23rd, the drones came, and they knew the base's layout. They appeared at dusk when visual acquisition is hardest and infrared sensors are suppressed by residual solar heating of the ground. They flew in formations, they split, they converged. The first drone of any given night was typically the largest, flying at high speed, as if conducting a reconnaissance pass. The smaller units followed behind. Local Virginia law enforcement even chased them by patrol car or on foot. They scrambled resources from the FBI and the Department of Defense. Even NASA dispatched its WB-57F high-altitude research aircraft to fly circular orbits centered on Langley in an attempt to capture data from above. None of it worked. Every night, the drones vanished just as quickly as they appeared. The next morning, the base could only confirm that something had been there, had observed them, and then left. It was like having a foreign force parking in the Pentagon's backyard for 2 weeks straight while the guards watched through binoculars. The whole time, America's most advanced air superiority fighter was grounded at its home base. The Air Force couldn't afford to have an F-22 collide with a drone in the dark. The military said the drones weren't intercepted or destroyed because of legal constraints on engaging unidentified UAPs over U.S. airspace. And technically, that's true. Federal law restricts using force against unmanned aircraft over domestic soil, partly to protect civilian aviation, but also because shooting one down could spiral into a serious legal and political mess if it turns out to be a private system. Those rules made sense in an era where drones were hobby devices. They make considerably less sense when drones in question are hovering over a nuclear-capable air defense installation, and they can't even be identified or tracked. The legal framework hadn't caught up to the threat. And that gap between what the law permitted and what the situation demanded was apparently something the operators of those drones understood perfectly well. They were operating in the space between America's rules and America's capabilities. So who else on this planet might know exactly where those gaps are? The default assumption in most public UAP discussions is that if it looks impossible, it must be impossible. So when a sensor shows something jumping from 0 to Mach 20, people just assume the object itself is doing it in the real world. They're wrong. And understanding why matters more than almost anything else here, because it changes what you think you're looking at. Welcome to the world of spoofing. Electronic warfare spoofing works by injecting false signals into radar and sensor systems to create ghost returns. These are readings that appear on a screen as solid contacts but correspond to no physical object at the reported location. The technology has actually existed in various forms since the Cold War, but its extent and capabilities have advanced dramatically since the 2000s. A well-executed spoofing attack can make a slow-moving drone appear on a radar screen as a contact moving at hypersonic speed on an impossible trajectory. The sensor simply sees what the spoofing signal tells it to see, and the maneuver exists only in the data. The aircraft doing those extreme maneuvers doesn't necessarily exist in the physical sense. What exists is the signal in the sensors picking it up. And if you had a real camera in that same spot, well, there might not be anything there at all. So what Navy pilots were sometimes describing as unexplainable flight behavior may, in some cases, be something else entirely. Electronic warfare creating ghost contacts in the system. Signals designed to confuse, overload, and study responses in real time. But that is only one layer of the problem, because alongside the noise, there are real things in the sky that don't need to be faked. China's DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicle travels at speeds between Mach 5 and Mach 10, and it does it all while flying unpredictable paths near the edge of the atmosphere. The routes are specifically designed to break the intercept systems U.S. missile defenses were built around. Those systems were built to intercept ballistic missiles following predictable arcs. The DF-17 does not follow a predictable arc. Against U.S. naval defenses, the DF-17's performance advantage isn't subtle. In real terms, it would be like comparing a professional sprinter and a toddler in a 100-yard dash. America's countermeasures are not even competing in the same event. When you combine phantom sensor manipulation on one side with real hypersonic weapons on the other, you end up with a completely new kind of threat. And that is where the alien propulsion narrative is faulty. Or maybe that is just the intended outcome. If your first assumption is, well, that was an alien spacecraft, you stop looking for who on Earth could actually be behind it. You stop asking which adversary has the capability to create those sensor signatures, and you stop asking a much more dangerous question, whether someone is deliberately probing American defenses just to see how the system reacts. And someone responsible for that policy apparently knows it. In summer of 2023, Senators Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds introduced what would become the most significant piece of UAP legislation in American history, the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act of 2023. The bill wasn't some symbolic gesture, it was designed to force the system open. There would be a presidential review board and board declassification powers. There was also a legal requirement for agencies to hand over their UAP records. But buried inside it was the part that really mattered, an eminent domain clause. The clause that stipulated that the U.S. federal government had the right to take possession of any recovered technologies of unknown origin held by private persons or entities. This extended to biological samples that would suggest non-human or non-Earth origins. The key word here is private entities. If a defense contractor was holding recovered materials that the government had contracted them to study, the government could seize them. The contractor would have no legal recourse to refuse. For any aerospace company with programs operating outside the standard disclosure framework, that clause was not just inconvenient, it could ground the programs to a halt or create a possibility for them to be dissolved. What happened next followed a pattern so familiar in Washington that it barely registers as news. Then the pushback started. Congressmen Mike Turner and Mike Rogers led the effort to strip the bill down before it could pass, and when the 2024 defense bill finally emerged from committee in December 2023, the UAP Disclosure Act was barely recognizable. The independent review board was gone, the eminent domain provision was eliminated, the original idea of automatic public disclosure was gone. In its place were 25-year delay periods and national security exemptions that allowed records to be withheld indefinitely if they were considered a grave threat. In the end, the government kept full control over what the public would actually get to see. David Grusch called it the greatest legislative failure in American history. According to Open Secrets data for the 2023-2024 election cycle, Turner received over $174,000 from defense contractors and over $80,000 from the defense aerospace sector. Rogers was the single largest recipient of defense sector funding in that cycle, collecting over $400,000 from defense contractors. The two representatives who ensured the eminent domain clause never became law received well over $650,000 combined. Across the broader cycle, total defense industry contributions to those blocking the bill exceeded $1.2 million. The same sum could fund 40 full Ivy League scholarships. Turner's identified donors include Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, BAE Systems, and General Dynamics. That's basically the entire roster of the companies that would have been most directly threatened by mandatory disclosure of privately held recovered materials. So what exactly are the defense contractors paying $1.2 million to keep a secret? The answer points directly at the Pentagon's own books. In November 2023, the Pentagon failed its audit for the sixth consecutive year. It did so again in 2024. In 2025, we're now up to 8 years of audit failures. This is not just a minor case of swapping numbers. The Department of Defense controls approximately $4.7 trillion in assets between facilities, equipment, weapon systems, inventory, real estate, and financial holdings. And according to the Pentagon's own auditors, by 2023, roughly half of that money couldn't be properly accounted for. That's enough money to build around 150 Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carriers, the most expensive warships ever built, at roughly $13 billion each. What the Pentagon's audit failures reveal is a financial architecture deliberately designed to resist transparency. Special Access Programs, or SAPs, sit at the top of that architecture. They are classified research and defense programs that operate outside the normal procurement and oversight framework. They're funded through mechanisms that are intentionally obscured within the budget. The Pentagon's own Inspector General has acknowledged the existence of unacknowledged SAPs. They're buried so deep that even the congressional committees meant to oversee them aren't always fully briefed on their existence or funding. Independent Research and Development, or IRAD funds, also allow private contractors to conduct classified research without standard public audit requirements. The costs are charged back to the government contracts in ways that are extremely difficult to trace. But the facilities associated with the most sensitive American aerospace programs are a matter of partial public record. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, the division behind the U-2 SR-71 and the F-117, operates out of Site 4 at Plant 42 in Palmdale, California. It's a government-owned complex leased out to defense contractors. Northrop Grumman also built the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber there. Then there's Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, a classified test range where weapons, sensors, and systems are developed and tested, but the details are not made public. These facilities are not secret in the sense of being known. They are secret in the sense of what's happening inside them. There's no real oversight of what programs are funded, what technologies are being developed or studied, and at what cost. None of this is properly being audited on their results or even just funding. All people know is that money goes into the projects and that anything that comes out is immediately classified. Grusch testified directly to this. He accused the military of misusing funds to keep UAP-related programs hidden from Congress. And he wasn't speaking in theory. He said this was something he saw while working as a cleared intelligence officer. Money meant for one program gets shifted into another, funding that goes into the black budget and does not come back out in any way oversight can follow. At the 2023 mark, that meant 6 consecutive failed audits and $1.9 trillion in unaccounted for assets. That was the sign of a system that's been operating this way for a very long time. And the people with the most detailed knowledge of exactly where that money went are the same people whose political representatives just ensured the eminent domain clause would never become law. There's a provision in American law that requires any government or contractor program dealing with UAPs to be reported to what is called the Congressional Gang of Eight. These are the 8 senior congressional leaders who sit at the top of U.S. intelligence oversight: the Speaker of the House Minority Leader, the Senate Majority and Minority Leaders, and the chairs and ranking members of both intelligence committees. They're supposed to have access to every classified program the executive branch runs. That is not a preference, it is the law. The evidence before Congress, presented by Grusch and corroborated by other witnesses, suggests that programs related to UAPs have been operating without the required notification. The working theory is that the notification wasn't delayed. Instead, the system surrounding the programs had become sufficiently autonomous, sufficiently self-funding, and removed from standard oversight mechanisms. The intelligence community was not operating within the constitutional framework, but around it. This is exactly what the Gang of Eight provision is designed to prevent. No program, regardless of its classification level or sensitivity, can operate without the knowledge of at least 8 elected representatives accountable to the American public. When that safeguard gets bypassed, it stops being a simple classification issue. You're left with a system inside the state making huge financial and strategic decisions with almost no real visibility and very little democratic accountability. Suddenly, a government-sponsored entity can spend huge amounts of money without anyone being the wiser or being able to control where it goes. So the money is missing, the airspace is compromised. Elected representatives have been locked out of programs that are legally required to be disclosed to them. On the other end is the public-facing narrative. We're being told that the only explanation is that the most UAP or UAP-adjacent events are possible evidence of alien intelligence coming from beyond Earth. This is the narrative peddled to us by Congress and the government itself, and it's easy to see just how convenient that is. It's specifically designed to prevent any rational interrogation behind what is really going on in or around vital defense installations across the U.S. Which brings us to the last piece of the puzzle. If the craft over Langley were actually extraterrestrial, then why does the Pentagon's cover story serve the interests of terrestrial defense contractors so perfectly? And what, in the end, is the actual threat? Here's what the evidence actually shows, assembled without the filter of the narrative that's been constructed around it. The 46 classified videos withheld from the House Oversight Committee are not being suppressed to prevent public panic about extraterrestrial intelligence. They're being suppressed because of what they document about the state of the American military capability in the most sensitive airspace this country possesses. What those tapes almost certainly show is not craft from another galaxy. What they show is high-definition, sensor-grade footage of an adversary unmanned system operating inside restricted U.S. airspace, and they do it without being challenged. The Langley incident is the most visible example of a pattern that's been occurring at multiple sensitive installations for years. The narrative is that these are UAPs and they should be classified for another agency to deal with as an oddity and as a part of our search for extraterrestrial life. But that conclusion was merely a managed communications posture. It's a controlled burn. That narrative simply obscures what the real problem is, and there's a reason for that. We don't know what these are prevents accountability in a way that Chinese drones breached Langley for 17 nights we couldn't stop them doesn't. The first is a mystery, the other is a military and intelligence failure of the highest order. The UAP label also has a second function that is equally valuable to the institutions deploying it. It launders the financial record. If these programs have been running for decades, it's easier to describe the spending as research into a mystery, because the alternative is harder to say out loud. That it may have funded dead-end reverse engineering efforts, or electronic warfare defenses didn't work as intended, or sensor systems failed to catch drones now getting into U.S. bases. Failed research and development at a classified scale is politically catastrophic, but classified R&D directed at a genuine cosmic mystery is somehow more survivable. So the alien story is not covered for alien technology, it is a cover for failure and for money that can't be explained away to the public. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, the Navy pilot who testified alongside Grusch, said it plainly. If everyone could see the sensor and video data that I have, there is no doubt that UAP would be a top priority for our defense, intelligence, and scientific communities. He was right, but not for the reason the alien narrative assumes. If congressional oversight saw those 46 tapes in their full classified context, UAP would become a top priority. It would be undeniable proof that someone on Earth has achieved a degree of access to American restricted airspace that the U.S. military can't currently prevent. And that someone is unlikely to be a friend to the U.S. It's most likely to be China itself, with a system similar to what the country has already shown to be capable of, now directly flying into the U.S. mainland for surveillance. The threat isn't from the stars. The first battle of the next war has already been fought in the skies over Virginia in December 2023. It was fought without a single shot being fired, and the U.S. clearly didn't win. And if that sounds like an isolated incident, it isn't. Similar questions have been in some of the most sensitive locations on Earth. Find out in MiLitAry Can't Explain These UFOs at US and Russian nuclear weapons sites, or click on this video.